Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to cover the complete story of the Sins of Sinister's event, written by various authors. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. 10 years later, in the nursery of Krakoa, a single person stood waiting for several eggs to hatch. As life rushes into the world, we are met with a shocking revelation. To me, my Sinisters. And following those words, we skip back to the current day, where we pick up moments after the banishment of Nathaniel Essex, just to discover everything is not as it seems. For our Charles bears the mark of Sinister. But see, he isn't the only one, because somehow Sinister was able to corrupt all the psychics that passed judgment upon him. So with half the council under his control, the sky became the limit for Sinister to influence all of mutant kind, and if he plays his cards right, the world. And what would be the best way to do that? By filling the 3 vacant seats on the council, but not with more mutants, no, but humans. Humans that they can control and manipulate. Because if they give humans a small sense of representation as well as the opportunity to undergo the resurrection process, then the doors for long-term security will be wide open for the taking. And take they did, because within no time at all, the council was in complete agreement on the plan, and off to the races they went. Now following that, we fast forward 1 year. And when we picked up in New York City with our good friend and journalist, Ben Urich, as he met with JJ, better known as James Jonah Jameson. And if we know one thing about JJ, it's that he loves a good story involving heroes. And just as luck will have it, that's Ben Urich's specialty. And the story he has is something that would shake the foundation of the Marvel Universe. But as an expert journalist, one thing he learned throughout the years is to be certain about whom he puts his trust in. And with the Sins of Sinister in full effect, a test would be required. A test that can ensure one's identity, to ensure they are not sinister. Because he speaks of a Trojan horse buried within the mutant's gift to mankind. A Trojan horse within the limited X gene that is supposed to guarantee immortality. But see, this gene also has a dark side within it. For it comes with a personality that can be activated at any time that pushes your worst impulses. Ultimately turns you into the darkest version of yourself with loyalty to only Sinister. For politicians, heads of state, and influencers are all under his control, with no one ever being the wiser. But see, Ben Urich was wiser. Ben Urich was able to crack the case. Ben Urich saw through the deception, but he did overlook one thing. And that was who to trust. For the test he was using was a trap, created to lure out those who knew too much into the open with a false sense of security. So with Ben Urich out the way, we skip back over to Krakoa, where we pick up with the council as well as a few new Sinisters. One of which is one of the smartest mutants alive, who just so happens to be hard at work. For Forge is working on an orbital cannon to commit something I would have never seen coming. For Forge was about to conduct a direct attack on the island of Krakoa itself. An attack that would leave the mutant island in a vegetative state. For this accomplished 2 goals at the same time. See, the island of Krakoa has the complete ability to control everything that happens on itself, to the point where it could make itself uninhabitable to all mutants if it wanted to. And this is something that Sinister could not risk. And the second goal was to turn the island into a martyr and a rallying point. See, by attacking Krakoa, they were also able to frame their longtime enemy, Orcus. Because shortly after the attack, Emma sent out a psychic message relaying the news that all mankind's backups were destroyed in an Orcus attack. Now this infuriated the humans to the point of uniting against a common enemy. And just like that, both the mutants and Avengers wage an all-out assault on the Orcus Forge, completely taking them out. And as for Nimrod, Tony Stark, Iron Man, was able to affect it with a virus long enough for both Thor, the god of thunder, and Storm to deliver the final blow. And just like that, the mutants' biggest threat was gone. But see, this attack also provided something else, because Cyclops also granted Captain America a gift, which so happened to be an X gene. Now this made him an honorary member of the X-Men as well as a future Sinister. So with everything going according to plan, the next step was to free the one who started this whole thing. Sinister. And how did he start this whole thing? Easy. He started this whole thing from the very start in House and Powers of X when he turned over his database. For when he turned it over, he added a little special something to all the DNA samples. He added himself. But there was one problem, and that was the power of Hope Summers. Because every time she would help in the resurrection process, her power would fix the meddling he did with the DNA. But after her death, he was able to corrupt her and everyone who followed. But see, if he would have just killed her, it would have been too suspicious, so he needed a way in which it looked like an attack on all. Which leads us to today. And today is where Sinister enacts the next wave of this master plan, which is clearing the playing board of all opposition remaining. Starting with the Mad Titan himself, because within the first year of his 5-year plan he was able to take out Thanos. Now the way he went about doing this was by tricking a volunteer Juggernaut, then miniaturizing him and placing him in a cannon created by Forge. And finally, he had Hope Summers, who borrowed the power of Domino, fire him out the weapon. And by doing this, Juggernaut was able to fly cleanly through Thanos' head, killing him and instantly leaving his brain matter across 2 billion years of history. And as for Juggernaut, he was left flying through space with no one attempting to retrieve him. And as for the second year, Victor Von Doom grew suspicious of Krakoa, which led him to form an alliance with Namor. But little did he know, Namor was already killed by Emma Frost and replaced with a Sinister version. And when his guard was down, he was stabbed in the back and replaced with a clone. But see, this clone continued to spout anti-mutant rhetoric while being under the control of the mutants. And now this leads us into the third year, which is a repeat of Judgment Day. For the mutants of Krakoa and Arakko teamed up and went to war with the Eternals again. But this time, per the peace treaty of the first Judgment Day event, gave the mutants 1 hour of Uranos' time, which they used to unleash him upon his family, where he defeated them all and then placed them safely into stasis pods and launched them deep into space, where they were never heard from again. And as for Uranos, he was sent back to his prison covered in the blood of his family as he smiled. Following this, the next logical threat Sinister had to deal with was Reed Richard and the Fantastic Four. And the way he went about doing this was by compromising Ben Grimm the Thing by giving him a Mystique gene which allowed him to return to his human form. However, after the gene took effect, he wanted one more thing. And that was for the rest of his team to die as he lived, which Krakoa was happy to provide. Basically, another mission through cosmic rays was arranged, where Ben Grimm choked out his family as they disappeared into the void. Now, this leads us to the final year of his 5-year plan, which was the takedown of the Avengers. Basically, the Avengers team was compromised with the X gene, which led them to become more and more antisocial and malevolent, which climaxed in a war when Captain America took over the US government after murdering the sitting president. Now this led to the X-Men stepping in to play the heroes as they took out the Earth's mightiest heroes. So once the second wave was completed in Sinister's plan, we skip back over to the once vibrant but now vegetative Krakoa, where we see the Quiet Council undergoing a meeting. But one thing to point out about this assembly is the new additions to the council: Beast, Magic, and noticeably Namor. For with Namor among their ranks, mutants officially control the oceans of the world, furthering the influence of the all-mutant state. Which ultimately brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Because one person at this meeting has yet to be compromised, and that is the region of Arakko, Storm. And despite all of their advancements, she points out that she is not on board with their current dealings, and most importantly, she wants to know where is her friend Kurt. And at that moment, Mr. Sinister walks into the council chamber with an overmutated version of Nightcrawler. And if you want to see what's going on with Kurt, you can check out Legion of X. But getting back to the story, we see that Storm is completely shocked by the revelation that Sinister is no longer in the pit. But this revelation came a little too late, because before she realized what was going on, she found herself completely surrounded by some of the most powerful mutants in the world. But before all hell broke loose, Sinister fills Storm in on what he had accomplished. He tells her the only reason why she isn't a subject of his is because she took herself out of the Resurrection Protocol. So in an attempt to eliminate Storm, he uses Charles and Emma Frost to try to psychically manipulate her. But little did he know this was nearly impossible to accomplish. Because prior to coming to Krakoa, she asks Lactuca to link her mind to his Infinite One. And by doing this, Lactuca safeguarded her from any psychic attack. So with that in place, Storm was able to summon her power over the elements and obliterate the Council's chamber. Now this took out several members in the process. So following that, Storm retreated to Peru, where she was met by Destiny and Mystique. And at that moment, the three form an alliance to take on the forces of Sinister's Krakoa in a mutant civil war. So with Storm and her new allies on the run, we see Sinister now officially replacing Storm on the council as he moves into his next 5-year plan. And a crazy 5-year plan it was, for the first thing they did was place Sebastian Shaw on the Infernal Parliament alongside Lords of Hell like Mephisto and Dormammu. And then they convert the mutant waiting room, which was created by Wanda, into his own Hell realm. And following that, Through Sebastian Shaw's dealings, he was able to make a deal with Muspelheim and borrow Surtur's sword so magic could destroy Asgard. And just to avoid people like Wanda from getting in their way, the mutants struck first and took her out before she knew what was coming. And as for Charles's old school, he converted that into a lab where he created the first generations of true chimera that were hinted about in House and Powers of X. Which in my opinion looks freaking boss, and I hope we see more of them following the events in Sins of Sinister. And finally Sinister was able to launch an invasion of Arakko that led to the destruction of the whole planet, turning it into an asteroid belt. But as for the fate of Storm, no one is certain of her whereabouts. So after wave upon wave of success, we skip ahead to the current day where we once again see the Quiet Council in a meeting on Krakoa. And the purpose of this meeting was to plan out their next moves, like tracking down the remaining members of Orcus as well as Storm before they become a problem. But with Sinister being who he is, he ended up showing little to no care about the issues facing them as a whole. But rather he was more concerned with how far he could push his research, due to the fact that he could reset the timeline at any time and use whatever he learns in his next life. But to his shock, Emma Frost stood in opposition to his goals and called for a vote instead of blindly following him. And just like that, the rest of the Quiet Council voted in favor of Hope Summers' idea over their master Sinister. So with their dissent in overvoting him, Sinister chooses to confront them and ask if they meddled with his work in creating them, in which they admitted to doing just that. Now to me this was no surprise because, from the very start, the first thing you learn is to never trust Sinister. And with them all having a part of Sinister encoded in their DNA, it would only make sense that they too could not be trusted. Now this led Sinister to come to the realization that the timeline should be reset. So immediately Sinister leaves the chamber and pulls out his teleportation device to take him to his top-secret lab under Moira's old home. But in a strange turn of events, the device failed to do as intended. Now this forced him to travel there the old-fashioned way, but in another twist of fate, when he arrived his priceless clones of Moira were gone alongside his entire lab, leaving him stranded in this hellish version of the future. So with that issue coming to an end, we jump over to issue number 1 of Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants, written by Al Ewing. And when it comes to this issue, it starts off with dialogue saying, yes, Storm remembers how Arakko died, and she also remembers confronting the Quiet Council. For Arakko had changed for the better, whereas Krakoa only changed for the worse. And because of these turns of events, Storm wanted to know the reason why, and unfortunately, she found out. But she managed to escape only by using a psychic failsafe implanted by her fellow Araki. And following that betrayal, Storm was ready to go to war then and there. But she was advised by cooler heads to wait. So instead of going to battle, Storm marshaled her forces and called in her favors. And by doing that, she grew in strength to the point where they were ready for anything. But unfortunately, they actually weren't ready for everything, because Krakoa attacked all at once. Now they blamed the attack on the Skrulls as a form of propaganda to further conflicts on Sinister's Mad Horizon. Augmented troops, they claimed, like the Super Skrulls of old. But Arakko knew them for what they were, his chimeras. Because while they planned, so had Sinister, and he left nothing to chance. But they were of Araki, and so they fought knowing they would lose. Because that is what it is to be of the broken land. Even when the land is broken for all time. Now her people are scattered to the winds of space. Or here, and hiding among the asteroids that were once the fertile fields of Arakko. Perhaps if Storm had gone against Destiny's kind advice, if she had struck earlier, they may have had a chance. And with those words, we see the ruler of Arakko herself, the powerful goddess, Storm with anger in her eyes as she glares at Destiny with disdain. For it was her cooler head that caused the mutants of Arakko to wait. But despite all that transpired, Destiny stood before her with a sense of arrogance as she told Storm that she won't kill her today. Because she has foreseen it. Which is not the right thing to tell someone that your visions have failed in the past. So at that moment, Storm orders her right-hand man John Ironfire to strike. And strike he did as he plugged a spike into the back of Destiny, or at least a person who pretended to be her, for this was actually Mystique. Now this was no surprise for John, because he noticed several key things that gave her away. First, was her body language, second, was her vocal inflections, and finally, he just never forget a heat signature. So slowly, due to her healing capabilities, Mystique returned to her feet in order to deliver her message, and what appears to also be a gift. Because she offers a chance for Arakko to live again. As she reveals Sinister's ultimate secrets. Because she goes on to say, Nathaniel Essex has a secret cloning facility dedicated to a secret clone. A clone of Moira MacTaggart. It has the activated mutant gene. The power to reset the timeline to the first moment of her life, should that life end. The clone life began almost 10 years ago. Which means if you take out the clone, then they can get a redo to before Sinister activated his plan. Which was all Storm needed to hear, before she called for her Brotherhood for a mission. Now, who is this Brotherhood of Mutants that stands before the forces of Sinister? Cable, Storm's weapon master, Cora, who has the power to boost other mutants' powers, WizKid, a techno-genius, and finally Ironfire, Storm's right-hand man. And Quick, the fastest mutant alive. So, with everyone assembled, the mission was on as they appeared on Moria's island, only to be met by Sinister's Chimera security system. For these chimeras was a cross between maggot and marrow genes, which means every bone in their body was a flesh-eating creature. So with that news, Storm orders the team to split up, leaving Cable, Clara, Mystique, and Quick on the surface to hold them off, as WizKid, Ironfire, and herself make their way into the lab. So summoning her control over the elements, Storm used a tornado to dig their way to the lab. But once they got there, they were met once again by chimeras, but this time these chimeras were some that were never seen before. One of which was a living force field in the center of the room. So with a race against the clock, Storm orders her right-hand man to buy them time and hold back the hordes of chimeras in the room. Which he did in spades as he launched attack after attack on the creatures surrounding them. So while Ironfire did all he could, WizKid was supposed to be trying to crack the shield, but that was when something unforeseen happened. For on the surface during the battle, we see Mystique glitch out and disappear as we discover that she was just a hologram the whole time. Which takes us back into the lab, where we see WizKid teleport the entire lab force field to an undisclosed location. But before they could celebrate, out of nowhere WizKid stabbed Storm through her back as he changed into Mystique. So as Storm lay bleeding out on the floor, Ironfire rushes to her side confused about what just went down, which Mystique answered by saying she was able to trick him because she gave Ironfire fake tails for years in order to fool him. And as for the other version of her, that was a hard light hologram, perfect down to the thermal signature. So as anger filled him, Ironfire went for a death blow on Mystique just for her to teleport away. So in a panic rush, John orders the rest of the team into the lab to conduct an emergency medical evac. So as that transpires, we transition over to the World Farm, where we hear the Mystique is returned with the lab according to plan. So with the Brotherhood doing all the hard work of taking out Sinister's defenses, it gave Mystique the opportunity to strike at the Brotherhood's heart. So with Storm down, the Brotherhood would be unable to retaliate. Which is wild because if Storm would have done nothing, then Sinister would have rewound time anyway, because the Quiet Council would have held a vote against him and Sinister would have decided to cut his losses. But at that moment we find out that she wasn't working alone because another person responded from the shadows, telling Destiny that he know how he thinks. This chaos he unleashed was his idea of a controlled experiment. But only this experiment is no longer in his control but rather theirs. But before he reveals his identity to the reader, he asked Destiny one question. And that question was why she didn't want to turn back time. Which Destiny replied by saying, in this timeline, her wife Mystique lives, which is a callback to a previous issue where she once said that every timeline with Krakoa ends in Mystique's death. So with that bit of information, we get to reveal that Orbis Stellaris, the Spade Sinister, was Destiny and Mystique's secret partner. So with that said, this issue of Storm's Brotherhood of Mutants came to an end. This issue opens 10 years into Mr. Sinister's rule, with the spirit of variance in the former Sanctum Sanctorum, which is now located in New Essex. And currently, our hero is scared out of his mind, as he hears movement in the shadows around him. For Mother Righteousness, the Heart Sinister, ordered them to find items of power that can help change the tide of the future. But little did he know those sounds he heard in the shadows weren't rats. No, those sounds he heard were Sinister's elite team of assassins, the Legion of the Night. Which is freaking crazy, because this Legion is made up of Nightcrawlers that is mixed with many different variants of heroes and villains, which included Spider-Man, X-22, Sabretooth, Pyro, and Domino. So before the spirit of variance knew it, he was surrounded by the entire team. And within seconds the X-22 variant had him dead to rights, as her claws sat inches from his face. But in a burst of power, he was temporarily able to free himself, even if it was for a moment. Because within that split second, Banshee suggests that they should attempt the scream of change. which the spirit replies back by saying, "You know that won't work." Because in past encounters with Sinisters, the scream failed to break his hold over those who were corrupted. But in a last-ditch attempt, the spirit let out a massive scream of change at point-blank range right in X-22's face, which causes everyone to stop dead in their tracks. And in a twist of fate, the X-22 version of Nightcrawler jabs her claws into the neck of her former comrade. And just like that, the Spider-Man and Domino versions followed suit as they also began to take out the Sabretooth and Pyro versions. So with that said, when the smoke cleared, the spirit of variance stood triumphant with his new legion at his side. Now, following this turn of events, we get some dialogue from the X-22 version stating that they were born in wombs of steel. We have spent our short lives as passengers to the ambitions of a disgusting mind, and that there is such emptiness inside. Please, we need to know, what are we for? What higher purpose do we serve? Now this shows the reader that within each person that is infected with the Sinister's gene is trapped within their own body. So with that said, we skip over to the House of the Fall, which used to be the summer house, located on the moon, where we see the spirit talking to Mother Righteousness. And the spirit is asking if his findings were good enough for her liking, hoping that she would approve. But that is when Mother Righteousness states that she deals in faith, because hope is a useless currency, as she enters the House of Fall. And within this home was a gathering of minds. Minds of Sinisters. But not just normal Sinisters, no. Because in this house were both Orbis Stellaris, the first chair of the Galactic Rim, and Dr. Stasis, which is the commander of the Orcus forces. Now this is a big deal because these two were not expecting a third guest. Because we find out that Mother Righteousness was not invited. In fact, we find out that they had no idea who she was. In which she fills them in by saying, over the last 10 years she worked on fixing the X gene that was bewitched. And ultimately, due to a few sacrifices, she was able to fix it. Which of course pissed Dr. Stasis off. Because of course, Orcus was behind commissioning that hex. Because through that hex they were able to prevent Sinister from using some of the most dangerous bloodlines like Nightcrawler's genes. So with that information, Dr. Stasis accused her of working for Sinister, which she debunks by removing her mask, revealing the white heart in the center of her forehead. So in a fit of anger, Dr. Stasis ordered his bodyguard to attack. But before he could get far, the spirit of variance sprung into action and summoned his new legion. And out of clouds of smoke emerged the Nightcrawler chimeras. And within moments, X-22 dispatched the bodyguard as the other two swarmed Dr. Stasis. But surprisingly, he was holding his own as he deployed a string of attacks that held the chimeras at bay, until X-22 delivered the death blow via a claw hidden within her tail. So as he lay dead on the floor, Orbis Stellaris lets it be known that he never really liked Dr. Stasis to begin with, and that he was surprised that she was able to pull it off. But that was when Mother Righteousness cut him off and stated that you wanted him dead, so he is dead. And as her payment, Orbis Stellaris promised her answers, which he gave without problem, saying he was the one who stole Sinister's lab, which put everything into perspective for Mother Righteousness, because she stated that he didn't want him to reset the timeline, and you couldn't tolerate Stasis getting back his base of power. And as for herself, he wouldn't allow her to know, because she also wanted the timeline to reset. So with that information out there, Orbis Stellaris revealed that he has processing power of the World Farm, and it is crushing possibilities to find a path to the highest throne. And at this rate, no one would be able to crack the shield before he reaches his goal. So he advised Mother Righteousness to stay out of his way, and he would grant her safe passage through his dominion. And with those words, he teleported back to his World Farm. Now feeling plagued, Mother Righteousness storms out of the House of Fall, but not before she orders her spirit of variance to find new recruits, new followers. Which was exactly what he did, as the spirit of variance and his legion raided lab after lab, picking up new members along the way, bringing a Colossus and Pixie version of Nightcrawler into their ranks. But during this trip, the Nightkin really started to grow into their own, showing signs of being truly kind and caring for those around them. And ultimately, the spirit comes to the realization that he should trust the Nightkin's instincts because they are the best among us. And a quick fun fact. Along their journey, they came across both Dr. Nemesis and the original Nightcrawler himself. And they stated that despite Mother Righteousness fixing the hex, Nightcrawler is still unable to regain his original form, and only resurrection can fix him. So fast forward and we jump over to Avengers Crater, or formerly known as Avenger Mountain, where we see Mother Righteousness summoning her legion to her side. And this legion arrives bearing gifts. Gifts that she wants to use to destroy the barrier around Sinister's lab. Because the Mother's goal is indeed to put an end to this hellish world. And that was when she formally assigned the Nightkin the task of setting everyone free, by asking for volunteers to teleport into the World Farm. Which the Spirit immediately saw the flaw in this, because he states that entering the World Farm is surely suic, but before he could finish his statement the Mother cut him off with a hush. So following that, X-22 stepped forward to volunteer herself, but that was when the Spider-Man version cut her off, because he removed his mask, and said he would be the better option, due to the fact that he could hear Sinister's voice in his head fighting to take control. Because the scream of change only works for a limited amount of time before Sinister takes back over. So with Spider-Man chosen, he teleports to the World Farm only to be met with hell and fire, for he was disintegrated upon touching it. So following his death, Mother Righteousness takes the remains of Spider-Man and brings it before the other Nightkin and asks what was his name, in which they state that they have no name, but they all called him Wallcrawler. Which Mother Righteousness responded by saying, Wallcrawler has returned back to the spark, as she began to repeat his name, which the rest of the Nightkin joined in the chant. So once they were done, she told her followers that Sinister made them into the ultimate killers, but she wants to turn them into holy thieves. And at that moment she renames them the Buccaneers of Light, then order them to go out and find several items that could help open the barrier, which in her words are the instruments of gods. So with that said, this issue comes to an end. This issue opens 10 years into the future in New Essex. And when we get there, we see none other than Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos preparing for a mission. Because as of right now, they believe they have the best shot of taking down Sinister, since Orchis was taken off the board in Nightcrawlers issue number 1. So as this insurgency prepares to attack the Westchester complex and uploads a virus to Cerebro, a strange compulsion takes over their bodies. In a twist of fate, the whole squad exits the building through a window, which sent them crashing to the ground below. And with that said, this rebel cell was no more. Because that strange compulsion was the work of Charles Xavier doing his thing. Because up to this point, the Sishiks of Krakoa were taking out all of the insurgent cells that stood against them. Now, despite Charles Xavier being the one to deliver the death blow, a part of him still mourns for having to do it to begin with. Because like I stated in Nightcrawler issue 1, a part of their original personality is still inside these compromised bodies. Which meant this still tough for Charles to kill them, but on the other hand, Emma had no problem doing what needed to be done. In fact, she goes as far as to say Charles always rushes his jobs, while she prefers to savor the moments. Because this sinister version of Charles's sole focus is to accomplish his dream, and he would stop at nothing to achieve it. But this is when they are interrupted by Hope Summers, because she wanted to call for a meeting. So with that said, Emma uses her psychic abilities to call the Quiet Council together. And the purpose of this meeting is to talk about Krakoa's future prospects. Because according to the data page given to us, the problem is that they rule only Earth. But they are growing stronger and faster than any other galaxies could have seen coming. And because of that, in 1 to 10 years there could be a start of an intergalactic war that would be fought as a proxy war. But mostly once they hit the 10 to 30 year mark, the children's gloves will have to come off. Because most likely one of the bigger empires will attack them in an all-out galactic war. Now the two most likely suspects that would challenge them would be the Shi'ar or the Kree/Skrulls Empire. But see, most likely in the beginning the forces of Krakoa would be able to hold them off. Until the 30-year mark, because 2 or more empires will join forces to take them out. So at that point, it's basically game over. Which means in conclusion, in order to change the outcome of this future prospect, Krakoa would need to look into getting bigger guns. So following that, we transition to another of Sinister's private labs, where we see Sinister have a conversation with a clone of himself in order to bounce ideas off of. Now, during this vent session, Nathaniel Essex let everything out on the table, ranging from his inability to find his Moira clones and control the Quiet Council to the lack of quality tea to drink. So as he rages on, he brings up that he has created an implant that is already built into each clone's genetic sequence that would take them all out with just a click of a button. But the only problem is that he left the controller in the same lab that Orbis Stellaris stole back in Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants issue number 1. So with that option out the window, Sinister had to think of a secondary option, which was by trying to regain control over the Quiet Council by doing a gene update. But before he would do it, he thought about asking Dark Beast how he would go about creating it, because most likely the Quiet Council used the other beasts to alter their genes to begin with. But just like the kill switch, the head of Dark Beast was stolen along with his secret lab. So because of that, Sinister comes to the conclusion that he would have to do it the hard way. So before he exits his lab, Nathaniel Essex makes sure to eliminate his latest clone due to his inability to trust himself. So following that, in a bold play, Sinister sneaks into Emma Frost's room in the dead of night carrying a needle with the gene update in an attempt to gain control. But little did he know, this plan was about to go horribly wrong. For Emma Frost trusted no one, because our girl sleeps in her diamond form at all times with the help of Mastermind chained to her wall, which is jacked up, because she forces him to stay awake all night on a cocktail of amphetamines. So with great haste, Sinister quickly got his butt out of Dodge as Emma called for a Quiet Council meeting. So with this epic failure, Sinister was made public enemy number 1 as the forces of the Council scoured the globe in search of him. And one of the cool things that were brought up in the data page was that they went to Wakanda to find him, stating Sinister could have had an unlikely private treaty with Wakanda. So to make sure Sinister wasn't there, Charles was going to breach the matter with the sealed polity of Wakanda, which means Wakanda could still have control of itself. But anyway, we skip to Sinister's secret Westchester complex, where we see the man of the hour. And apparently, his time has run out, for Emma Frost arrived on the scene and was ready to put in some work. But see, Sinister was waiting for this moment because he created a weapon made just for her, using the genes from Banshee and Cypher. And the reason why this was so effective was because the Cypher genes would read the vibrational frequency of Emma Diamond form and calibrate the Banshee screen to shatter that material, which so happens to be Emma's arm. But unluckily for Sinister, he wasn't the only one prepared for this fight, because Emma took out a pack of patches with Wolverine's face on it and slapped it on herself. And just like that, her arm grew back, which forces Sinister to go to his backup plan, which were some chimeras of the Nasty Boys mixed with Cyclops. But much like his first idea to stop Emma, his second one would end in the very same manner, because all Emma had to do was use her psychic power to make them kill each other. So with Sinister backed against the wall, Emma took a chain and wrapped it around his neck and began to choke the life out of him. But as she chokes him, they have a small but important conversation, because Sinister states that in time they all will turn on each other, which was something Emma was fully aware of, because she states that each member uses each other to their advantage until they are useless. And as for Sinister, he has run his course in her eyes, until he mustered up his remaining will and reached for a button on a council and clicked it. For this button activated a hologram of a prototype chimera that would help win the coming war. So eager to hear more, Emma slightly released the chain just enough to ask some additional questions about what she was seeing, which the bound Sinister answers by saying his new chimera would be able to use 5 mutant abilities at once. So with this new revelation, Emma stated that she would bring his fate up to a vote before the council, but before she would do that, she needed one thing from him first. And that was for him to beg for his life, which he did without problems. So when all was set and done, the council had their vote, and due to the coming future threat, the council voted to keep him on to work on his latest chimeras. And fun fact, this chimera that was shown on the hologram could be the same one that we saw in House and Powers of X that went by the name Rasputin 4, the 3rd generation chimera which fought against Nimrod. But anyway, getting back to the end of the story, we see a broken and beaten Sinister surrounded by dead chimeras as he looks on to see Emma leaving the room. So with that said, this issue comes to an end. So with issue 1 of Immoral X-Men over, we transition over to issue number 2 of Nightcrawlers. Following the indoctrination of the Nightkin under Mother Righteousness's rule, we see her commission these lost souls into finding several objects. Objects that would be instrumental in taking down Sinister's chimera barriers surrounding his lab. So with her Shadow Legion on the hunt, we pick up 100 years in the future of this worst possible timeline. So this issue opens with a gathering of Nightkin in the shadows of Asgard, preparing for what they will have to do next, as the armies of the Red Diamond finally launched their attack on the proud home of Thor. For 90 years ago, the seat of Asgard was sent spinning into the void after Magic first attacked back in issue number 1 of the Sins of Sinister comic. And because of that turn of events, the people of Asgard were able to survive in their isolation. But now in the 100th year of the Sinister era, magic of the Red Diamond has decided to finish what she started. So as she restored the Bifrost and laid waste to their forces. Now to some, this was a tragedy, but to others, this was a window to act, for the Nightkin have been waiting for this moment. So as the fight waged on, the Nightkin danced between the raindrops of war as they teleported their way through the chaos with precision and focus. For like many other civilizations, the Asgard version of might wouldn't be enough. Because much like Sinister Era 53, Charles used several hybrid brains made up of a little Farouk and a little Valentino to kill a civilization using paranoia and pain. Now the reason why they know is because they were there. And with great skill they were able to save 6 shards of the Mkron crystal without no one being the wiser. In fact, the Legion has made the way they sneak through the margins of tragedy into an art. Now many have tried to form an alliance with the Nightkin, but many have been turned down, for alliances isn't the Shadow Legion's way. For their goal is to gather the magical treasures of the universe. Like during the Age of 77, Otherworld reached out for an alliance to stand against Sinister, but due to their ways the Nightkin declined and offered to take their treasures to prevent them from falling into the Red Diamond's hands. But of course, they refused. But in a twist of fate, a day later, Hope deployed the first triple chimera made up of Megan, Magget, and Madrox. And in a plague of magic slugs, Otherworld was undone with no problem. So of course the Nightkin took their artifacts while they died heroically. But see, this wasn't the worst of what the Red Diamond has been cooking up. For Sinister also created several system killers, which is made up of a fusion of the Omega-level Mutant Legion, Proteus, and Polaris. Now, this creature was so powerful that during the Age of 89, it single-handedly took out the Xander's sun in a single airburst bomb. Within moments the Xandarians and the World Mind cried out before going silent forever alongside 32 members of the Legion. Members that were killed for the greater good. But it was only a matter of time until their reputation came to precede them. For some see them as scavengers and arbiters of death. For when it came time for Asgard to fall, Thor stood against the Legion in order to keep their weapons out of their hands. But even Thor couldn't stand between the Legion's holy mission. For with a slash of a blade, Thor's arm alongside his hammer was cut from his body forever. And with the use of gravitational pull, the Legion of Shadows was able to control the way the hammer fell in an infinite loop. So with the hammer in the hands of the Nightkin, the last father was left to his fate at the hands of the Frost Giants, as Asgard was lost forever. So with all of that said and done, we pick up on the current day, where we see the spirit of variance on board the Narthex, traveling through space. Now, this ship isn't much of a home, but at the end of the day, it's the only home the Legion knows. And with there only being 53 members of the Shadow Legion remaining, things aren't looking too good for the future. Especially, because the last recruit the Spirit bought back was 2 years ago. But anyway, getting back to the story, an Iceman variant of Nightcrawler informs the Spirit that Legate is awaiting his arrival, and unfortunately, things aren't looking good. Because, once again another member of the Legion is losing the fight to their inner Sinister's genes, due to a great trauma. For a while ago, after the quote-unquote miracle, Summer Knight lost the will to move on. For this miracle was the birth of a child between 2 Nightcrawler variants, which was said to not be possible. Because when Sinister created them, he wove infertility into their X chromosomes in an attempt to have more control. But in a triumph of love and patience, they were able to overcome that programming. For when this baby was born, it came out gold. And within seconds the baby began to glow, and out of nowhere it disappeared within a cloud of smoke. Now Mother Righteous rewrote their tragedy and put the child at the center of their faith, and told Summer Knight to celebrate this moment. Now this was too much for him to bear, so with that said, Legate lost her last connection to her child as she watched her love, Summer Knight, teleport into the barrier ended his life. And the crazy part about all of this is that Mother Righteous has fooled all of the Nightkin into believing that this is a righteous death without them even knowing the truth behind it. And because of this, Legate no longer feels sadness or pain, but instead, she feels only rage. So with all this tragedy in the air, the news only gets worse for the Nightkin, because the Spirit believes that the Sinisters have realized there is some quirk that makes the Wagner strain susceptible to emancipation, which ultimately causes them to stop creating them. So with their numbers running low, there is only a matter of time before there is no more left. Especially because Mother Righteousness's list of artifacts is steadily growing longer. And whenever it comes to her explaining her plan on how to enter the barrier, the Mother intentionally leaves things vague. So with that said, Vox Ignis tells Legate that he watched Mother Righteous talk to people throughout the years asking them what they would have done differently. Which means, ultimately she has no idea what she is doing at the end of the day. Because Vox Ignis goes on to say, a while ago Mother Righteousness went to visit Legion himself. Now, this version of Legion is on a whole other level. Because from what I can see, he is in 100% control of himself. To the point where he has the power to ascend to a whole different plane. Because for years Legion has chosen to stay out of everything and protect those he could. And as for his thoughts on Mother Righteous, he states that he have watched her a century ago, getting in people's heads and manipulating them. But now, he sees her reduced to only gossip and regrets. So before he parted ways with her, Legion ends the conversation by saying, "You're welcome to your ambitions, whatever they may be." Because the X gene has become a cancer, so he is taking what remains of his people and leaving for the higher planes. And with those words, they parted ways. So following this realization, Legate and Vox Ignis comes to the Mother with an idea to strengthen the Nightkin. And this idea is to journey to the long-abandoned planet of Earth to find a certain someone. Now just for some context, the planet Earth fell victim to the Council's reach into the cosmos. Because for years the clone factories pumped out huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, making it unlivable to humans. But the perfect home for the Brood and the Annihilus. So with most of the living creatures on Earth gone, the Annihilus came in and took over. But before they did that, the factories were emptied, and the forces of the Red Diamond flipped the plasma cores and filled the ionosphere with debris. So no ship could come or go. So getting back to the story, the person they were looking for was Dr. Nemesis. Because throughout the years his computing power grew immensely as his fungus spread. And with his help, they believed he could help create more of them. But see, he wasn't the only one they went for. Because Legate also spoke to Nightcrawler and explained what was going on, and let's just say he wasn't okay with it. Because out of a cloud of smoke came the original Nightcrawler, and in a monstrous rage, he grabbed Mother Righteousness. And just like that the fight was on. But unfortunately at the end of the day, Mother Righteousness was too powerful for him, so before she finished him off she stated to the Nightkin to look upon their sire. Look how low this world brought the greatest of them. Look on their shame and be grateful to the Mother who guides them. Because the spark is whatever she says it is. And right before Legate, she cut his neck, which killed Kurt. So enraged, Legate charged the Mother with her claws at the ready. But in a snap of her fingers, all the Nightkin was brought to the ground. And in an arrogant tone, she ordered Vox Ignis to burn them alive. Which he refused to do so, before also being brought down to his knees as well. So with the battle over, the Nightkin that was loyal to her took the original Nightcrawler and wrapped him up and sent his body to the barrier to add to the sea of bones. So with everything said and done, before the Mother could deliver the death blow to Legate, Legate witnesses a voice within the orbs floating around the Mother. Because in this orb was a child saying that she still lives. For Mother Righteousness has deceived her the entire time. For the Mother has taken Legate's child. So with anger filling every bone in her body, Legate teleports back to Earth where she declares her war against the Mother by saying, "So let this hateful universe see the pride and vengeance and ambition and all those other brief flames that would eat themselves. For there is a new spark in the firmament. Because her rage will burn with love, love for her child, and love for her people. Love that will wait as long as it must, to set them free. Love that will last 1,000 years." And with those words, this chapter comes to an end. Hey everyone, welcome to issue number 2 of Immoral X-Men, which is the 6th part of the Sins of Sinister event. And this comic picks up 100 years in the future, following Sinister's announcement of a potential prototype of the 3rd generation Chimera, which would be a combination of not 3 but 5 different X genes, which would be the strongest to date. So with that said, this issue opens at the edge of the Pax's system during a full-scale planetary assault led by none other than Hope Summers and Exodus. For in this system, the Kree/Skrull and the Rigelians have joined forces in an attempt to resist the mutants' advancement. But even with the help of the Supreme Intelligence, both empires stood little to no chance in pushing them back. For the mutants have weapons of mass destruction on their side, named the L-Bomb. So with all that on the table, we get our first real look at Hope Summers during this era, and by the looks of it she's been doing a lot of body changes. For the majority of her body has been replaced with robotic parts. And when it comes to her God complex, that is at an all-time high, as she asked her crew, who do they all believe in? So in unison, they all chanted the most feared name in the universe, Hope. So, as the war waged on, we get a dialogue from Hope Summer, stating how despite her having a fleet at her disposal, she still prefers to fight her battles face to face, as her and Exodus lay waste to a Super Skrull with no problem. Now in her own words, she credits this to the fact that the fleet believes in Exodus because Exodus believes in her. So once that battle is all but over, the Messiah of Mutants casts down her holy judgment as she deploys the dreaded L-bomb. Now the L-bomb is a crazy concept that blows my mind, because an L-bomb is actually an unstable chimera with 4 X genes spliced together and kept in a tempostasis vault until needed. Now the way it works goes as follows. The first gene that is used is Lila Cheney's gene because it allows the mutant to teleport to anywhere they have been in the universe due to a psychic imprint of the destination. So once the L-bomb has arrived on the target planet, the other 3 genes kick in. Now this is where it gets wild, because those genes belong to Firestar, Leland, and finally Micromax. And with their genes combined, they create a nuclear fusion that can increase its mass and scale. And due to all that power going off at once, it basically creates a planet splitter, which was exactly what they used to destroy several worlds, as Hope envisioned crosshairs over the now eradicated planets, which at the end of the day, ended this pocket of resistance. For in the data page, we get more of a look into what Hope has been up to in the previous years. For within the last 100 years, the forces of the Quiet Council were able to corner and take out Mystique as well as majority of their once feared foes, with the exception of Storm and her remaining forces. So getting back to the story, we pick back up with Hope and Exodus overlooking a pot of spare body parts belonging to Hope, due to the fact that Hope still doesn't clone well. But just because she doesn't clone well, does not mean that the discarded parts can't play a role, because those bits can synergize with all the duplicates of her crew, which keeps the resurrection process going. Now, when I say the resurrection process is going, I was referring to the new norm, because now they focus on creating clones to fight in wars, rather than resurrecting old mutant friends from back in the early days of Krakoa. So with this soup available, Hope is able to fight in her own holy wars on the front lines without fear of ending the resurrection process. For in her opinion, every war she is a part of is by definition a holy war. And due to their constant success on the battlefield, Hope is forced to look for her next conquest. But in order to find the next enemy, Hope will need a faster mode of transportation, which so happens to be the ship of the Marauder, a state-of-the-art piece of mutant tech, which includes, but not limited to, a battery from Shaw, Eunice glands, and a Tempest Magic Drive Bio substrate. But regardless of all the tech on board, one thing was still missing, and that was a captain for the vessel, which is the purpose of the gathering of the Quiet Council, because on this day, Nathaniel Essex was in charge of producing said captain of the ship, which just so happens to be the fabled third-generation chimera by the name Rasputin 4. And the way this demonstration will go is by having Rasputin fight against a squad of chimera mystiques. And let's just say she did not disappoint, for within moments, she was able to defeat all of them. For like I said before, Rasputin is made up of 5 different X genes, something that was once said to be unstable. But due to years of trial and error, Nathaniel was able to pull it off, because Nathaniel Essex used Colossus and Kitty Pryde genes to stabilize everything, as well as a little bit of Eunice just to add a force field. And for aggression and survivability, he used some X-23 genes. And finally, Nathaniel Essex was able to add an Omega-level telepath DNA inside of her. Now usually one would assume the telepath DNA came from Jean Grey, but much like Hope, she was too hard to clone. But when it came to Kid Omega DNA, it was much more malleable. But see, that wasn't it, because she was also equipped with a freaking soul sword, because a weapon that could attack while remaining intangible has obvious charms. For Nathaniel Essex has trained her for his cause. For when all is conquered, all will be at peace, because he created her to be a true hero, a hero that would fight for what is good. So with this groundbreaking achievement completed, the council asked the question that in their eyes would seal Nathaniel Essex's fate, which was, is it possible to create a 6-gene chimera? Which he replies by saying it would be impossible to achieve as he walked with Rasputin out the room. So with Nathaniel Essex, quote-unquote, reaching his peak when it comes to creating useful chimeras, the council declared that his usefulness has run its course, which ultimately marked him for elimination. So with the clock ticking down, it's only a matter of time until they come for his head. So with that said, we skip over to Nathaniel Essex walking into a room where he is met by a strange and mysterious book with a Heart of Thrones on the cover. So being ever the scientist, he couldn't help but to examine it, and to his dismay, the book was of magic, one of the sources of knowledge he despises the most, which was funny to me because out of the shadows of the room emerged Mother Righteousness. Now, this was a shock to Nathaniel Essex because up to this point, he had no idea of her existence. So of course he asks a flurry of questions to uncover her identity. But no matter what he asked, the answer was always the same, which was, the answers to the questions are in the book. So eventually, Mr. Sinister decided to play along after several failed attempts to receive information and ask for the key to the book that holds all the answers, which Mother Righteousness smiles before telling him that she will give him said key, but all he has to do is say thank you, which he did. So without any games or trickery, she gave him what he wanted in order to find the answers. So with the book finally open, Nathaniel Essex begins to read the pages, uncovering the truth hidden inside, which was basically everything leading up to this point. So with Sinister all caught up to speed, Mother Righteousness exits the room, leaving him to contemplate his thoughts. His thoughts on how he wishes he still had his Moira clones to better use this information. So as he wishes for what he could have had, we skip over to Hope Summers and Exodus once again raising hell, but this time on the Chitauri. For once this world have fallen, the council agreed that Sinister would be next. So much like their last extermination, Hope and Exodus make their way to the planet's surface to set the stage for yet another L-bomb. But unlike before, something odd went down, cause Hope went falling to the surface completely powerless. So in total shock, Hope called out for her Exodus only to be met by a true surprise. For her once loyal guardian, Exodus, has abandoned her, for he flew far enough away from her that she was unable to duplicate his powers, which left her in a situation where she was just a girl with a gun surrounded by thousands of enemies. And just before Exodus went radio silence, he tells her, "You are of no more use to the council or the church," for he was the church, and the church was bigger than her. And as for her role as the Messiah, her job is to inspire the church, to give the church something to pray for, in hope that one day she will return. So with Hope Summers still being among the church diminishes the faith, which means she is more valuable to the church dead than alive. So with Hope left to die, Exodus issues an order for his ship to retrieve her body the moment she flatlines, because her body is precious and holy to the new church he will create. So with the most feared and hated woman in the universe left defenseless and alone, the forces of the Chitauri takes the opportunity and attack. So in Hope's last stand, she fights her hardest, for she already knows that she will fall this day. But regardless of her situation, she still finds peace in knowing that she will not be the only dead member of the council in the coming years. So with Hope Summers off the table, we transition back to our Diamond Sinister. And when we get there, we truly see a change in his personality, for we see just how proud of Rasputin he really is, calling her his finest work as he issues his final gene treatment, because this treatment removed the red diamond on her forehead, freeing her of anyone's control, making her truly free. So with a new outlook on life, Rasputin asked the same question the Legion of the Night did when they were freed in Nightcrawler issue number 1, which was, "What does this mean?" In which a changed Sinister responds by saying, Krakoa was a paradise until he destroyed it, because back in the past Krakoa was an island of love and freedom, and Charles's dream was a soft-edged pillow, and Emma thought all children were to be cherished, not commanded. It was the best thing that ever happened to the world, and because of his doing in creating the strain that infected the world, he was the one that turned them all into monsters, and because of that, he was trapped in their service ever since. So he had to witness them do so many horrible things to the universe. And the only way to set this all right is to purge the gene from everyone's system, by using his stolen lab, by using his Moira clone. So with all that said, Sinister drops to one knee and tells Rasputin that he raised her for good, because this universe needs a light, for she is a hero in a blighted world, and she alone can save everyone. So with that heartfelt message, Rasputin and her father makes their way on board the Marauder and issues an immediate launch despite not being cleared for exit. So in a mad dash into open space, Rasputin ordered her team to fire 2 Protoss mutants into the seal hull, which I personally think is wild. But anyway, after breaking free, they launched their magic Tempest cores and jumped into hyperspace, leaving the council forces in the dust. So with the sky ahead cleared and full of possibilities, Rasputin asked her father, Sinister, where to now? in which he responds by saying, "To find my lost treasure and undo all of this," which should, in his words, take only around 5 years, which we all know will not be the case. So with that said, this issue comes to an end. Welcome to issue number 2 of Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants, which is part 7 of the Sins of Sinister event. Now up to this point of the story, Storm is in charge of an underground freedom fighter team by the name of the Brotherhood. After a massive betrayal from Destiny, in the previous issue, the surviving members of Storm forces are left in disarray, as the Precog joins Orbis Stellaris with Sinister prized lab. So after some time, we fast forward to the present day, during the era of the Galactic War, which is a struggle between the Sinister Council and the Interstellar Compact, which is led by Orbis Stellaris. So while the powerhouses of the universe battle it out, Storm and her Brotherhood are trapped in the middle, fighting for the freedom of all men while seeking vengeance for Arakko, the first casualty of the Sinister Wars. So during the doomed mission to the ice planet Varan, the rival insurgent cell known as Freedom Force was able to transmit the location and schematics of the Compact's latest, most terrifying weapon, a mobile command post the size of the solar system to Arakko base. So with that said, this issue opens on a space station somewhere out in deep space. And when we get there, we see a ship coming in for a landing. Now, the commander of this station is none other than Novar, or better known as Marvel Boy. And personally, by the look on his face, he was not happy with who was showing up. For the person who was boarding their ship was the enemy of Arakko, Destiny. Now the purpose of her trip was to have a meeting with Storm, but when she exits the vessel, she is met by Cable, now known as X-Man, Ironfire, and Cora, now all of which wasn't happy to see her at all, based on her previous track record. But see, Destiny couldn't care less about any of their feelings towards her, because some time ago the love of her life Mystique turned her back on her and joined the Resistance. Now, as you may have guessed, Destiny was completely against this move, but with Mystique forever being a warrior, she couldn't live her life on the sidelines forever as people were being killed in the billions. So as she exited the room for the last time, Mystique told Destiny the truth, which was that she didn't want to spend the rest of forever as a trophy in Destiny's vault. For if you love someone, you set them free. And with those words, they parted ways. But much like many of the heroes over the past 100 years, Mystique was ultimately killed in battle. So with nothing left to live for, Destiny decided to betray her once ally, Orbis Stellaris, and reset the timeline in order to get Mystique back. So getting back to current day, we see Destiny with tears in her eyes as she explains her loss to the Brotherhood. Because Destiny truly wanted to live forever with Mystique. Because when they were together, the decades flew by like summer days. It was truly enough for her, but sadly not for Mystique. So as Destiny is bleeding her heart out, Storm arrives on the scene. And regardless of all the time that has passed, the feelings between the two women have not changed at all, as the two begin to dig into each other. But see, Destiny came for a reason, for she had an offer, because she explains to Storm that the last time she was before her she offered a chance to end all of this cleanly, which was obviously a lie, because she had too much to lose. But with Raven dead, the galaxy feels like it is on fire. And because she has lost everything, in her eyes, it is time to finally kill Moria. So with the information in hand, once again the Brotherhood forms a strike team to assault Orbis Stellaris' base of operations. And on a side note, let me just say this issue gives me heavy Star Wars vibes. I know everyone is going to compare it to Star Wars, and for the most part, it's true. But anyway, getting back to the story, we see the Resistance drop out of warp space, and before them, we see Orbis Stellaris' new base. The Death Star, or the Death Sphere, whichever you prefer to call it. For with this massive ship, Orbis Stellaris is one step closer to reaching Dominion. For in this shell, the progenitors are hard at work using all their power processing data. So with the alert going out, Orbis team goes on the attack. And at first, they were under the assumption that the Red Diamond forces were the ones attacking them. But after receiving additional data, they were shocked to see the invaders were actually the Brotherhood. So completely confused by the turn of events, Orbis Stellaris orders his men to only deploy the standard fighters to intercept the Brotherhood X-Fighters in space. For he believed the progenitors was best served to process his data. So with every standard fighter deployed, the odds were completely one-sided, with 100 to 1. But little did Orbis know, the rebels had an ace up their sleeve, because Destiny was being supercharged by Kora's gift. Now with Destiny's abilities working at 1000%, X-Man is able to read her mind and relay the information in real time to his squad. So with everything a go, Storm asks Destiny what she sees, which she responds by saying she sees a pitched battle. For herself, Kora and Nathan's strategic sense creates an unbeatable combination, a self-fulfilling prophecy, the most potent of possible futures. She could even hear the moment Storm gives the order to destroy the artificial sun at the heart of the sphere, and even the lab at the heart of that. And finally, once the battle is over, Destiny speaks of a moment of euphoria and victory and then darkness, which she says is the end of the universe. So with the map laid before the team, we skip over to John Ironfire as he navigates through the enemy lasers. But to his surprise, he is visited by Mother Righteousness. And of course, Mother Righteousness is doing what she does best, trying to get into people's heads, trying to place doubts while recruiting new followers. For who is the best follower than a person who has already proven to follow others? But see, little did she know Ironfire was fiercely loyal to a goddess already, because he would do anything for Storm. So as the Brotherhood rips through the standard fighters, Orbis Stellaris realizes that Destiny is on their side, which was a little too late, because through an open hole in their defenses, Storm's full team was able to enter the giant orb as all of Orbis Stellaris' forces exited, which was a huge miscalculation on his part. So with the hole sealed behind them, Novor immediately locked his crosshairs on the center sun, ready to fire a black hole torpedo at the structure as soon as Storm issued the command. Which she did, but oddly enough the command was not what I expected, for the command she issued was to eliminate Destiny. So with the precog dead and gone, Storm orders Novor to stand down, which confused everyone, but Storm explains to them that this hell they live in still supports life, and because if there is still life then that means there is still hope. And then she goes on to say, 90 years ago she was angry, and even to this day she still is. But how many have lived and died since then? One dead planet does not justify a murdered universe. The lab is an abomination, one we must defuse, not simply destroy. And if we cannot, then we must guard it with our lives. So with that speech, Storm called Kora to her side to pull off one of the strongest feats I have ever seen a mutant do in all of Marvel Comics. For Storm showed what an Omega-level mutant can really do. For she states, an Omega-level mutant is to be without limit. But there are limits beyond limits. Power beyond powers that I am also heir to, for they do not call me the Old Witch without cause. Because for those who don't know, Storm's ancestors were the second Sorcerer Supreme, which means magic is within Storm's blood alongside her mutant ability. So with that knowledge, Storm began to speak an incantation, saying, her mother was a sorceress from a sorceress line. Her blood is in her, and in her name and those before, I call. In Ashek's name, in Aisha's name, I call you, Amam of the Invisible. I call you, Hahe who rules space. I offer you fire, and a life incarnate, that through magic and mutation I might command the weather of the cosmos itself, and summon a storm to shake realities. So with those words spoken, Storm was able to create a rip in space, summoning a cosmic storm, creating a massive wormhole that sucked in the entire lab alongside Storm's forces, which was a massive win for the forces of Arakko, because they were able to save the universe without getting a single scratch. For in one move, she was able to deprive Orbis Stellaris of his ability to achieve dominion, because he lost his progenitors, which was the key behind his ability to compute data, which took millennia to recalculate and recompile. And to add insult to injury, his life's work was destroyed by a magic blast. So with no options to move forward, he decided to do one final move, which was to turn off the life support system for his entire ship, taking out millions in the process. And with that said, the Spade Sinister was no more. So with the lab in Arakko's ownership, everything was turning out well for Storm's people, because the progenitors are no longer a threat to anyone without Orbis Stellaris controlling them. And as for the infrastructure alone, it can be reused as a new home for the Iraqi people. But unfortunately, the queen herself wouldn't live long enough to see the fruits of her labor, because due to the large amount of energy used, Storm's old body couldn't take the brunt of the stress. For the goddess, Storm, has fallen in battle so others can live. So with that said, this issue comes to an end. Hey everyone, welcome to one of the most anticipated videos. Today we're going to talk about issue number 3 of the Immoral X-Men from the Sins of Sinister event. Now this issue opens 1,000 years into the future, And during this time Rasputin makes a note to say that she fears that her creator, referring to Sinister, may be close to breaking, which I can't blame him because they spent centuries upon centuries looking for his stolen lab. But regardless of the time spent searching, Rasputin still has hope that they will save the universe, which is something to take note of because Rasputin at this moment is unaware of Sinister's plan to reset the timeline. So with that said, their search leads them to one of many prayer worlds. So as they hovered their ship in orbit, Rasputin teleported herself down to the surface in hopes of finding some kind of lead, some kind of clue that could point her in the right direction. So once Rasputin touched down, the first thing she noticed was chanting in her head, but due to her telepathic abilities, she was able to shield her mind. For around her were hundreds upon hundreds of eggs with clones trapped in each of them. For each of these souls, brains were trapped in an infinite loop and forced to chant jubilations to the Exodus, which leads to endless screams of rapture that echoed across the continent. And in the center of this echo chamber was a gigantic clone of a sleeping Exodus, an Exodus that was growing stronger with every chant. So with Rasputin being careful to take her time to scan each prisoner's mind, she made sure not to disturb the sleeping giant. For Sinister made sure to inform her that if any Exodus realizes that he is still alive, it will be bad news for everyone, especially himself. So after some painstaking time searching for the right mind under a sleeping god, Rasputin finally hits the jackpot as she finds what she was looking for. So without thinking of the consequences, Rasputin says a tiny prayer of thanks, which was the wrong thing to do, for the sleeping god awoke. So with her cover blown, Rasputin summons a getaway portal and jumps back to the Marauder and takes off into space. But before they could get away, a massive Exodus, that was just sleep, emerged from the prayer world and took pursuit. So with the race on, Sinister picked up his communication device and contacted the closest prayer world other than the one they just came from, to inform them that the previous planet just launched their Exodus. Now, this right here is a high-risk tactic because since the Exodus schism, individual sects have established their own claims, each with prayer worlds and Exodus clones pointing across the void at one another. So after many deadly wars, most subsects have created ceasefire scriptures to stop their bloody wars. And one of the main rules included in those scriptures is not to launch an Exodus, because if you do, a nearby sect will have to respond by unleashing their Exodus to avoid a first strike crusade. Because much like how we view nuclear war, the people of this universe fear Exodus's crusades. For when two of them meet, an unimaginable amount of lives are destroyed in mutual destruction. For when Sinister jumps into hyperspace, Rasputin's journal continues to explain how she has grown numb to all the death, because in this universe there are many planets filled with corpses orbiting dead stars. So the unimaginable numbers that will be lost between both sects are just a drop in the sea of dead bodies. And the only way to fix the universe is by following Sinister's plan. The only hope is that they succeed. So with that said, we see Rasputin and Sinister on the ship and he asks her if she was able to decode the clue in that person's head. And she responds by saying she did, but the only thing she got was some space-time locations and a phrase written in classical English saying, "We should be on the same side." And instantly Sinister was aware that destiny had something to do with the clue. So following that, we skip over to one of the most important data pages in all of the Sins of Sinister's event. Because on this page, we get an update on what everyone is doing after the 900 years time skip. Because according to this, Charles is the protectorate of the dream. And as for the Nightcrawlers clones, they are still a part of the Legion of the Night. Thirdly, this version of Colossus is the bulwark of materialism and the leader of the Space Soviets. And when it comes to Emma Frost, she is now the Empress of the Red Diamond Empire. Now, moving on to Kate Pryde, who was absent from this event, now has the title of Pirate Queen of the Void. And as for Hope Summers, her body was dissected into still-living reliquaries and distributed among the Exodus sections. Skipping over to Namor, we find out he became the Imperator of the Drowned Worlds and the sire of the Night Consorts. And as for Beast, he is just a gene-chained court scientist for Emma's Red Diamond Empire. Following that, we find out that Magic retreated to the Limbic Incursion after losing the 7th Diamond War. And finally, Sebastian Shaw rules the majority in the Screaming Council of Hell. So overall, the mutants are the undisputed rulers of the galaxies. So with that quick update, we get a small peek of some of their current territories as the Marauders is forced to pass by it to get to the coordinates. Because we get a quick look at a gigantic colossus guarding the borders of Limbo and our galaxy. Because Magic thought it would be a good idea to tear a rip through both dimensions. And following that, they fly through the front line of the war between Charles and Emma. For in this war, Charles is putting his soldiers' minds in a state of paradise while he is throwing their bodies at Emma's forces, which is wild. And finally, Rasputin and Sinister had to outrun Kate Pryde's fleet of ships to finally make their way to Destiny's message. And when we get there, we find out that Sinister created Rasputin to be able to travel in space for a limited time without a spacesuit, because she was able to teleport out in space and retrieve a small cylindrical object. And in the object was an old antique audio device from the early 19th century. So with the object in hand, Sinister requested to be left alone as he listened to the object. So after some tinkering and converting certain things, he was able to make it work. And on that recorder was a long message from Destiny, and it started by saying she was the one who stole his lab alongside Storm, Stellaris, and the Iraqis. And if you're listening to this, then they have hidden it again, because she did try to reset the universe due to Mystique's death. So if he is able to find a way to reset the timeline and return to the past, to seek her out because she will join him. And then she goes on to say that she did fight against him before and she understands if he doesn't trust her. But Sinister at the end of the day will need help if he ever wants to make a timeline worth living. For the only reason Destiny kept this dimension going was because this was the longest timeline where she and Mystique stayed together. And for a time she was able to beat the odds until ultimately she was ripped apart in battle. And because of that, she wants to try again alongside Sinister and his clones. And then she tells him to of course dissolve this cylinder when he is done listening to it, because inside are instructions that will allow him to find his lab. And finally, she lets him know that she understands that his goal is to one day transcend time and space and become a Dominion. But for his own good, he should give up and strive to create something new. And with that said, that audio comes to an end as Rasputin steps into the room, for she was eavesdropping the whole time. So with Rasputin all caught up with Sinister's current plan, she had only one thing to ask, and that was if he was really trying to save the universe. Which Sinister replied by saying, "I'm afraid not." So with the cat out the bag, Rasputin dug down into a crouch as she drew her blade and said that she don't think he gets to live then. And with that said, the fight was on. And as you can assume, Rasputin was far superior than her maker, given the fact she was created from the finest stable gene cocktail. With telepathic abilities, the power to become intangible, a powerful healing factor, and the ability to create her own force field all inside a body made of the hardest steel. And just to make sure no one could beat her, he didn't even install a self-destruction switch in her genes in case someone tried to use it against her. And finally, most importantly, he gave her free will. But the only thing he didn't give her was the power of flight. So with him avoiding her slash, he was able to escape the room and sealed the door behind himself before ejecting Rasputin, his greatest creation, into space. So following that tough decision, Sinister followed the instruction to the now deserted planet Earth. And when he entered the cave, he discovered the last Doombot that survived from all the way back, and issue number 1 of the Sins of Sinister event, as well as the original Moria herself. And when he sees her, he extends an offer to help him reset the timeline, which she accepts and agrees to follow him to the edge of the universe. So with that alliance created, we skip over to Emma's Red Diamond Empire, and we see Namor with his forces kneeling before the Empress, for apparently he has accomplished a major goal. And as a reward, he is allowed to kiss Emma's hand, which so happens to be made from the gem of Sidorak, which is the same stone Juggernaut uses to become what he is. And following the kiss, we see Namor beginning to change before we skip over to Emma talking to Beast. For Beast has received news from one of his AIs he scattered across the universe in the form of Sinister actions, because his spy just revealed to him that Sinister has recruited the original Moria to his side, for he is looking for his Moria clones. So with this revelation, Emma Frost orders her largest legion to go and search for Sinister, because as we know, if he finds the clones he could burn this timeline down. So with the full force of the Red Diamond Army aimed at Sinister, we skip over to the man himself arriving at the World Farm. And as soon as they flew into range, a beam landed a direct hit on the craft, sending it crashing to the ground. But fortunately enough, Sinister, Moria, and the final Doombot survived the landing. And as they emerged from the wreck, they came face to face with an ancient John Ironfire. And the first thing he wanted to know was about the Red Diamond Armada that was following behind them, for Emma was hot on their trail. And with Sinister being Sinister, he decided to strike an offer with John Ironfire. An offer, in his words, will save the universe. So with the war gearing up to start, we skip back over to the abandoned Rasputin in space. for she is still alive and kicking with air still in her veins, as her body floats in the empty space. So in order to survive, Rasputin slows down her metabolism, which allows her to live for a few more days. But the question she asks herself is, why should she do it, if all she will end up doing is dying slowly? But just as she started to give up, a voice appeared in her mind and extended an offer for revenge, for that voice in her head belonged to Charles himself. And with that said, issue number 3 of the Immoral X-Men comes to an end. So following the previous comic, we pick up with issue number 3 of Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants, which is part 9 of the Sins of Sinister event. Now this issue opens in the Storm system with John Ironfire awaiting the arrival of Emma and her Red Diamond forces. For this could be their final stand, with the fate of their universe hinging on the outcome. Cause as we know, Emma's main goal is to break them and destroy everything they stand for, and to make things worse, John Ironfire is fully aware that they are not ready for this battle. Because after the Diamond Jubilee disaster, the Storm system is a shadow of its former strength, but regardless of all that, they are in the situation they are in, and John also knows if they lose today, then it is all over. So with their goddess gone, they would need a new symbol of hope to lead them into battle, a battle that is stacked heavily against them. So with heavy conflict in his heart, he looks to his trusted friend, Cora, and asks if he should have trusted Storm. Which she responded by saying, "Is she the one you should be worrying about trusting?" which was a reference to the snake among them, Nathaniel Essex. So as the two navigate down the corridor, John Ironfire makes a remark about how much he misses X-Man's counsel since he has fallen to the orphan Madrox. So with Cora reiterating her standpoint, the two come to a massive double door. And as they entered, Cora states that they are Iraqi, and as Iraqi they were never afraid of death. In which an old weary John responds to his oldest friend by saying, maybe they should have been. For beyond this door was the new 5 alongside Sinister, with an evil smirk plastered on his face, as a foreshadowing of the evil to come. So as the Iraqis prepare for a resurrection, we jump over to the Red Empress herself, Emma Frost, as she is making her way to the Storm system and destroying every outpost along the way. For as the Watchmen spied on her, she spied back on them in return, and without warning unleashed missiles of great destruction upon their locations. Now, with a trail of death in the Red Queen's wake, the new 5's ritual begins in earnest, as Sinister hands over the last treasure in his possession, a single vial of Hope's precious blood. The same blood he injected into old Oda's egg, which so happens used to serve as a food source for her people. And then second, once the DNA was mixed into the egg, Krana, their commander, gave her orders to live and bear life. Following that bloodroot, the Bone Shaper formed veins and limbs as well as sculptors of flesh. Fourth on the list was getting memories into their creation, which was taken from John Ironfire by a mutant named Genos, who went by the name Mindflayer. And finally, Cora bathed them all in her heart's fire, creating a union and returning her to life. So with a clone of Arako's greatest leader standing before them, John Ironfire quickly was overcome with emotions as tears ran down his face. And with great pride, he welcomed this version of Storm among their ranks. For this version of Storm only have the knowledge that was provided by John Ironfire, with none of the original Storm's memories and experiences, which ultimately makes her a powerhouse without the know-how. So just as things were looking up for the Iraqi forces, an alarm echoed through the base as Emma's forces were at their doorstep. So just like that, Emma's overpowered chimeras started to wreak havoc upon the station, for each chimera was a combination of 4 mutants' abilities. So with that said, the battle started with the High Summers bestowing their cosmic death on the brave sentries. Then following that, the Lord Hailers bellowed their metal rain from behind their shields, while savage Hot Claws leaped out from behind them and raked the survivors, of which there were few left. Because Emma wanted all of this wrapped up before Beast arrived with the rest of the fleet, so with their onslaught falling behind her schedule, she took it upon herself to join the battle. So with victory in sight, Emma made her way into a chamber with a pool full of red liquid. Now once there, the Empress entered the liquid, and within moments her consciousness was connected to a Colossus diamond mech suit by the name Mistress Mold. So with the merger complete, she deploys herself toward the station to finish the job that is laid before her. For in this vessel, Emma emerged on the scene as the Blood Diamond Monarch, and without any mercy, she begins to lay waste to the enemy's forces, as she claims they broke her first commandment, which is praying to another goddess. which was something the Queen of Blood wouldn't forgive as she unleashed blows that echoed throughout a sun under siege. For each strike threatened the integrity of the center sun itself. So with John Ironfire and his team rushing to the surface, Storm could make out the painful cries of the sky and stars. So with little time to lose, Sinister suggests that they take shelter in the center point to wait out the attack in the impregnable vault, which was shot down quickly by John Ironfire, for it was no secret why Sinister was there in the first place. But regardless, John Ironfire only responded by saying he is aware that he owes Sinister, but the vault at the heart of Arakko is not to be touched, for the death door will never be opened. So with that news, Sinister quickly made his way to the crushed Doombot and ripped his arm off in order to obtain a gun for future use. So with a secret weapon in hand, the forces of John Ironfire arrive on the surface, and almost instantly Storm follows her instinct and starts to lay waste to Emma's chimeras. So as Storm's power whipped through their enemies, she quickly realized that she was born to fight. But unfortunately, she only has the knowledge of what she can do, but not how to do it, which means she is going purely off of instinct and not experience, which is a scary notion to be dealing with. So in order to maximize Storm's capabilities, Korra offers her goddess her ability. For once more, the Burning Heart gave all that she could give, so their goddess might rise and soar to new heights. For 9 long centuries, Korra's power matured in her heart, just waiting for the opportunity to give it all once more. And once more she did, as Storm's spirit sang as the war raged on around her. Until eventually the goddess took flight to face the Blood Diamond Monarch alone, while the Brotherhood held fast against a sinister tide of chimeras. But to their dismay, one at a time, each member of the new 5 was taken out, including John Ironfire's oldest friend Korra. But still, what was left of the Brotherhood fought on, for their endgame was to eliminate the Diamond, the same Diamond that was face-to-face with their goddess. So as the two square off, Emma lets it be known that this version of Storm is just a newborn that was way out of her depth. But the old Storm might have worried her, so with that said, all she sees before her was a spark of raw power without knowledge, who haven't even learned how to fight, yet alone learn how to win. But despite what Emma said, Storm responded by saying she also hasn't learned to lose yet, which means she has not learned to limit or set boundaries on her powers, and all she knows is how to play with the living sky. So with those words, Storm summons a massive lighting attack of raw electrons that she transfers through her skies and torn itself directly through the covalent bonds that connected the atoms, which ultimately causes the carbon molecules bonding to form the Frost-Hearted Queen to shatter into fragments within moments with nuclear force. So for one instant, a red sun rose in the Storm system and shone its baleful light as Emma's fleet completely exploded. So as death and destruction rained down from the sky, the forces of Arakko stand victorious as their goddess came crashing to the ground. For her lack of experience, Storm forgot to shield herself from the radiation, which caused massive burns throughout her body. So with the goddess laying on death's door, John Ironfire quickly covers her with his cape, for he knows on this day, Storm has given the universe yet another chance. So with this battle won, John Ironfire carries his goddess as he prepares for the next wave of enemies, for beast reinforcements is on their way. But before that is done, Sinister, forever the schemer, pulls his weapon on John Ironfire and seemingly pulls the trigger. So with that said, part 9 of the Sins of Sinister event comes to an end, which takes us to part 10. Now part 10 comes to us in issue number 3 of Nightcrawlers, written by C. Spurrier. So with that said, this issue opens with Mother Righteousness traveling throughout the universe, stealing every magical object they came across, including a phoenix egg. For all these items were added to her collection in order to add to a sacred weapon. Which is kind of funny, because she continues to say that the sacred weapon has been built, loaded, and armed for ages. So when it comes to the oil to grease the trigger, that would fall to her 15th generation of Nightcrawlers. For over the centuries, the Mother was pretty much able to remove any lingering trace of Sinister's control as well as any other genetic tampering, but for some reason, members of the Night can still approach her with issues of faith and tales of the apostate, referring to Wagnerine. So to keep up with the tradition, as well as weaken the shield, she orders him to do the same thing that many before him have done in times of crisis, which is to take the last leap. So as he bamps into the force field that surrounds Sinister's lab, she just continues along her way like nothing even happened. Because for a whole millennium, she was waiting for the rest of this quote-unquote rotten timeline to get its shit together so she can accomplish her ultimate goal. Now, on the following page, we see how her once ship is now infused with Dr. Nemesis and acts as her supercomputer. And through their travels, he was able to track Sinister's lab to the edge of the universe because one of his spores made its way to the World Farm, which didn't really mean anything until eventually Sinister arrived on the scene. So with the key now in position, Mother Righteousness rushes full speed ahead to the World Farm before Sinister is able to reset the timeline. But lucky for her, the Red Empress, at this time in the story, is currently engaged with Sinister and the Brotherhood in battle. So as they make their journey to the lab, Mother Righteousness is confident that Sinister hasn't made it inside just yet, for she believes in faith. Faith that she will be the first to reach Dominion. So with all that said, something was bugging Mother Righteousness about how he found it. Because centuries ago Destiny and Mystique stole the lab in order to protect the timeline, because this was the timeline where Mystique lived the longest. And because of that, the mother put faith that Destiny would do anything for love. But of course, eventually, Destiny would have foreseen Mystique's death, which in return would prompt her to come up with a Plan B. A Plan B that Mother Righteousness didn't see coming, for she rightly assumed that Destiny was the one responsible for leading Sinister to the lab to begin with, but that couldn't be the full story, because Destiny would never trust Sinister to carry this out on his own. So after some deep thinking, everything eventually clicks as something sparks in Mother Righteousness's mind, for the path ahead was clear. So with everything in her hands for the taking, she calls for Vox Ignis to send the coordinates and sound the trumpets and let the rapture begin. So as the call goes out, all the Nightkin remaining with the exception of Anti-Fortune, bamps their way to the shield and die instantly in a devastating explosion, which still wasn't enough to seal the deal. So with everything thrown at the shield, the mother then orders her final Nightkin to take her to the battle so she could witness what's about to happen. For out of nowhere Vox Ignis arrives on the scene with Galactus hot on his trail, for Galactus is currently filled with all the spirits of vengeances that escaped Earth after the rise of Sinister. Because after they all escaped the planet, they infected the Great Devourer, because his hunger for revenge upon those who poisoned this reality made him the perfect host. So in order to form an alliance, Vox Ignis sought them out to persuade them to join his cause, but unfortunately, the other spirits still hated him. So for the last 56 years, they chased him across the universe in an attempt to eliminate him. But when all of this was brought up to Mother Righteousness, she couldn't care less about his problem, for she watches a red bullet shoot across the empty space with extreme speed. Because 1,000 years ago, the Sinister shot an unstoppable object right through the brain of a Titan. And afterward, no one stopped to wonder where it'd go next, with the exception of Destiny. Because Destiny kept track of the poor soul, for she foresaw him traveling over a millennium through gravity wells, being slingshotted around with infinitesimal changes, which allows him to build up speed as he bends light and time around him. So without no control over himself, he screamed into the silence of the vacuum, unable to die, unable to stop. So with Juggernaut in constant motion, Destiny tweaked the path of the World Farm, setting up a cosmic trick shot with an impossible conjunction. And just like that, Juggernaut enters Galactus's head before colliding with the World Farm. For the unstoppable object weakened the unmovable wall. So with the Chimera on its last leg, a cold Mother Righteousness orders her final Nightcrawler to seal the deal. And without no hesitation, Anti-Fortune threw herself at the sphere, destroying the force field that surrounded the lab. So with the shield destroyed, Mother Righteousness and Vox Ignis entered the lab with countless bones floating around them with the reliquary Perilous in hand. Now, Vox Ignis was under the impression that it was created to eliminate the shield and take out the strain of Sinister across the universe, but he was sadly wrong. For Mother Righteousness' true goal was to destroy this universe and reset the timeline, much like Nathaniel Essex. For this sacred artifact wasn't to put an end to the conflict, but rather it was made to change the start. Because throughout this whole event, Mother Righteousness went across the universe for centuries and asked everyone about their regrets in order to build a database to send to the past. To create something akin to a cheat code, so hearts can finally trump all. Now the magic virus is the raw power of countless sorcerous artifacts, merged and retooled as a temporal contagion. Once deployed, the virus aggressively clings to any relativistic or chronological alterations to the present universe, infecting its way backward along the dying timeline toward the source. It carries with it whatever power, information, or magical actions the conjurer has encoded into its divine matter, executing these functions at the moment of arrival. In effect, it would serve as a message in a bottle sent back from an erased timeline to herself. And with all that power and knowledge, she would be able to navigate her way through history the second time around with no problem. So with the truth uncovered, Vox Ignis was not happy about what was about to happen, for this method would destroy and erase countless stories and lives instantly. But at this point in the story, Mother Righteousness had no further use for him, so to cover her tracks, she used the artifact to reclaim the spirit that was given to him 1,000 years ago. So with everything going her way, Mother Righteousness had to infuse one last part to set her goal into motion, and that was adding the Golden Child into the sacred artifact. But before she could do the deed, Wagnerine appeared out of a cloud of smoke, ready to deal out justice. Now, this caught Mother Righteousness off guard, for she was under the assumption that she died a long time ago. So with the element of surprise seemingly gone, Mother Righteousness proceeded to retaliate with a massive surge of energy that stopped our hero in her tracks. So right before she delivers the deadly blow, Banshee drives one of Wagnerine's claws directly into her foot, just long enough to catch Mother Righteousness's attention. For within a split second, Wagnerine used the blade hidden within her tail to deal the deadly blow. So as Mother Righteousness lay dying, Wagnerine took her baby and fled the scene. So as Banshee lay dying on the floor, he looks up one last time, just to see someone he wasn't expecting, for a bullet drove itself deep into the center of his forehead, killing him instantly. For Moira arrived from the shadows, with both the clone and sacred weapon in her possession. Now with both items in hand, the sky's the limit to what she can accomplish moving forward. So with that said, issue number 3 of Nightcrawlers and part 10 of the Sins of Sinister event comes to an end. So with part 10 coming to an end, we transition over to the Sins of Sinister Dominion, written by Kieron Gillen, which is part 11, the conclusion of the Sins of Sinister event. Now, after a millennium of Sinister's experiments running wild and battling across the universe, the Moria clones have been rediscovered. Through cult-like manipulation of Sinister's specialized assassins, the Nightkin, Mother Righteous, herself a Sinister, succeeded in breaking into the World Farm where the clones had been hidden away by Storm and her Brotherhood of Mutants, only to be killed moments away from resetting the timeline herself. So with that said, the original Moria MacTaggart, here to take the future of mutant kind into her own hands at last. So with that said, the epic conclusion kicks off with Galactus arriving on the scene chasing the spurt of variants, but from Nathaniel Essex's perspective, he just arrived out of nowhere. So as all hell is breaking loose, Moria asks Sinister is this what he wanted, referring to the chaos all around them, which he replies by saying just because it's a hell of his making, doesn't mean this was the hell he wanted, but speaking of hell, he asks her where the hell she is at, for in Immoral X-Men issue number 3, Moria was nowhere to be found. And to his surprise, she was right outside the vault trying to get in, but ultimately unable to do so, which prompted her to ask Nathaniel if he have had any luck changing Ironfire's mind about opening the door. Which Sinister had to respond by telling the truth, for the last time we saw them, Sinister put a bullet in the back of his head. So with time running short and Beast on his way, Sinister tries to figure out what Destiny's message meant, because Destiny's message was supposed to hint at another way into the vault. Now initially, he thought perhaps the undead Ghost Rider Galactus may have been a part of it, but he was wrong. But just as his ideas were hitting a wall, the Marauder picks up something small flying extremely fast in their direction. So with his curiosity peaking, they ask the computer to show them what it was, and to Sinister's surprise, they see the Juggernaut flying full speed in their direction. And at that very moment, everything clicked in Nathaniel's mind, for he realized that Irene was playing the long game, and maybe they should be on the same side next time around. So with impact imminent, Sinister shouts for Moira to brace herself as the human battering ram drove itself straight through Galactus's head and into the Chimera's shield in a massive explosion. So as the vault door opened wide, Moira took the opportunity to rush in as Sinister pleaded with her to wait for him because he had to upload his plans, which was something Moira cared very little about, for this was her opportunity to rewrite the past her way. But before Sinister could give chase, a blade attached to a chain drove itself through his back, catching him off guard, for John Ironfire was still alive and pissed. So with Sinister on his knees bleeding, John discloses that he can turn his blood into metal, and before every battle like this one, he makes sure he does it because it gives his bones a little extra coating of protection, like a shield. So where his blood is useful, he proclaims that Sinister's blood was pointless, for within moments he will be dead. So as Sinister cries out to Moira to stop and wait for him to upload his plans, John interrupts him and states, "If any plan you have doesn't involve dying, then it is over." So with everything looking hopeless for Sinister, we skip over the Beast making his way over to the battlefield. And with the death of Emma the Red Queen, Beast is making himself at home, due to him taking control of the Red Diamond forces, so with him sitting comfortably on the throne, he begins to strategize his next moves carefully because he was under the impression that the Galactus was a distraction. So with Beast being done playing these games, he orders their forces to deploy the Namemonauts to retrieve the Moira engine, but they would need their own distraction to pull this off, as well as an unlikely alliance with their sworn rival. Now this right here caught the Cuckoos by surprise, because they tried to warn Beast how big of a risk he was taking because at this point in their war, there are no conversations to be had with this individual but only assimilation. So with the psychic shields being brought down, Beast reaches out to none other than Charles Xavier to broker a temporary peace, because he truly believes that he could resist Charles's influence because of a method Charles taught him to do in the past. But unfortunately, none of that would mean anything, because over the years Charles has far surpassed those limitations. And before I continue this story, let me just pause on this image for a second of a Mad Max type Charles, for this dude is literally driving tanks over monks, which is crazy, but anyway, getting back to the story. So as Charles looked deep within Beast's mind, the gravity of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks, as he decided to step in personally and take over. And just like that, he astral projects himself through Hank's body and took everyone out on the bridge of the ship as he called for all the minds under his control to join him to fight for his dream. So with all that power rushing his way, he was able to manifest a gigantic head in space, made up of psychic energy, like the Eternal's Unimind. So with the psychic attack ripping its way through what is left of the world farm, both Sinister and John Ironfire is put in a world of pain. For Xavier has arrived, and with John's defenses gone and psychics dead, he immediately recognized that they are in big trouble. Now despite Charles' power, both John and Sinister personally have means to protect themselves, for Sinister is Sinister, which means he is prepared for everything. And John Ironfire's blood is extremely powerful, because once he spilled it upon his head, he managed to make a helmet like the one Magneto had with the same properties as Juggernaut's helmet. So with no time to waste, John was dead set in taking out Sinister, but with a few well-placed words, he was able to pause his execution. For he stated that he had a way to stop Charles. And the way he was going to go about doing that is by increasing the amount of blood John Ironfire can produce safely. Because human blood is made up of 90% water, so with a dose of Iceman DNA, John can produce all the water and blood he needs. So with the choice on the table, Sinister say all the scenarios out loud to better push John to decide, by saying, "So I can see you thinking maybe you'll be quick enough to take it from me and smart enough to activate it yourself. And you know, if you let me go, I'm just going to run off and try to reset the universe. And maybe you are right, but maybe someone will stop me, because I am one man that can be stopped, but Charles isn't. Because if he gets Moria, it's game over for everyone in the universe. I mean, they will still exist, but it'll be his universe because everyone will be trapped in his sick eternal dream, and with the Moira engine, he'll be unstoppable." So with the choices laid before him, John was forced to pick the lesser of two evils, as Sinister jabs him with the DNA, turning him into a massive metal version of himself as he charges at Charles head-on. And with Charles's psychic power having no effect, John ripped right through him as the fight began. So with Sinister free to do as he intended in resetting the timeline, he runs straight into Moira as she stood in his lab ready to do the deed. But with Sinister not willing to let it happen, he opens fire on Moira to get her away from the clone. So with the two at a standstill, Moira and Sinister have a small conversation about the ethics of him turning her into a machine, which is ironic because she has already done that to herself. So with a ceasefire called, Moria fills him in on why Mother Righteous is dead on the floor and how she had plans similar to him. So with that established, Sinister went to upload his plans into the clone when Moria still opened fire on him anyway, for she believed that Sinister didn't deserve to use the clones and learn anything from this timeline. But with Charles starting to get the upper hand on John Ironfire and the Namenauts on their way, time was too short for them to argue about who deserved it. So with their enemies closing in, Moira relents on her stance and tells him to hurry up and upload his plan, and tells him hopefully the first thing he does upon resetting the timeline is to destroy this whole lab. Now, with the Namenauts crashing into the room, Moria blasts away as Sinister uploaded everything. So with that completed, Sinister states that he wants to become a god by doing something he wanted to do from the very start. Because in the beginning they tore the control from him and meddled with his top-level work, but the infrastructure still remains, for his psychic Inferno failsafe was still operational, which so happens to be located within his lab. So with the switch in sight, he was ready to kill everyone with the modified X gene in this universe all at once, for they were going to wipe this dimension out anyway. So with the press of a button, everything kicked off. Now while this is going on, we get a dialogue for Sinister, and it goes as follows: "Mutants are special, I always knew that. The X gene makes who they are, or that's what everyone agreed upon, so at the end of the day, that is the heart of Krakoa because the X gene connects us all." Xavier thought it was like a chain of held hands, skipping through meadows. And as for Apocalypse, he thought it was like a bundle of sticks. But I thought it is more like a fuse on an old cartoon bomb that you can light. A galaxy of mutants can burn so hot, it sears a hole in all that is, which would take a miracle for any to be spared. A scream with so many voices that reaches beyond the curtains of our stage, the knowledge of all those minds consumed, digested, and injected into my hungry psyche. I have built a staircase straight out of reality, and every step is a corpse, for I am now everything. I escape everything, including the need to make a joke because you are now the joke, and I am becoming significantly more perfect than a god, for I am becoming a dominion. I soar on wings with untold trillions of bone feathers, which I leave time behind forever and become time itself. But to his surprise, something stopped him, for a dominion already exists, and a voice from beyond responds by saying, "I am the being that is harvesting the power you stole, as whatever is yours is mine now. I am a being of infinite knowledge and perspective. I could tell you everything, but instead, I share a single fact," which was who he was, which so happens not to be our Sinister. And just like that, Sinister blows up, as he returns back to his body defeated, for Sinister was too late. Because in a much earlier timeline, a Sinister already reached Dominionhood. And because it lives outside of space and all timelines, then it is now close to him forever. So with all hope lost, Sinister drops to his knees as the Grim Reaper enters the room, for John Ironfire was ready to fulfill what he promises earlier in the comic, which was to kill Sinister. So with a swing of a blade, Sinister had left his body. For over 1,000 years of life, he learned absolutely nothing. And with a pull of the trigger, the clock resets to 0. So with that said, the story picks up with Sinister back in his lab, creating yet another Moria clone, when a massive file comes across his screen, but before he could open it and see what took place over that time span, a massive explosion erupted in his lab that destroyed everything. And from the flames walked Moria MacTaggart herself with a story to tell. For she tells him that she found her way to his lab and watched the end of his rival's scheme. For the mother was going to insert a mystical virus into your machine. She'd spent 1,000 years finding the tools she needed to do it, but at the end of the day, she failed, because at the last second, she was stabbed in the back. And the crazy part was all she needed was a specific soul to sacrifice to finish, which she found and prepared it to do the job. The soul was radiant, saturated in the purifying faith of fanatics without number. So as Moria looked at her dying, she realized that all that applied to someone else too, so in a twist, Moria fed the mother to the heart and corrupted the machine herself. So before she could reset the timeline, Sinister showed up and revealed his trump card, the device he attempted to use to seek Dominionhood, which he ultimately failed to do. So Moria lets him know that everything he did was for naught, because this story belongs to Moria, and as for his story, it's over. So with that said, Sinister discovers that all the Moria clones' X genes were neutralized in the explosion, which trapped him in this timeline with no backups. So with that established, Moria left, but not without leaving a little something behind for Sinister, which was Rasputin 4 with her sword in hand. And by the looks of it, she is playing no games, for she was not happy with being left behind. Now a while ago, I thought it was Charles that was speaking to her about revenge on Sinister, but by the looks of it, it could have been Mother Righteousness. Because when she emerged from the cloning tube, she lets him know that he is wanted for the murder of mutant kind. So with that said, we skip over to the mother reading a book, when another room appears in her library, and upon entering it she discovers thousands upon thousands of books with what I could assume to be the memories backed up by the mother in the future. Which is a game changer, for by my count, 3 people possess the memories of the future: Moria, the mother, and Rasputin. So with that out there, we skip over to the Quiet Council, with the remaining members making a beeline to Sinister's base of operations. But before they could get there, Destiny gets a pain in her chest, as the future quickly expands in her mind, for with the fall of Sinister the future opens up wide. But just as that happened, a mysterious portal opened up before them, with Rasputin exiting it with Sinister bound and imprisoned. And by the look on her face, she is excited that Krakoa was real, for this was all she wanted to see. So with her standing before the council, Katie asks what is going on, and Rasputin responds by saying, she is the captain of the Marauders from 1,000 years in the future, and she is here to make sure Sinister pays for all his crimes. Which was something the council was more than happy to do, because on the next page, we see Sinister standing before the Quiet Council ready to face sentencing. And just as predicted, Sinister was dragged down into the pit, but before he goes, he warned everyone that he is not the one they should be afraid of, for there is already a Sinister Dominion out there that has already won, and his clones should be the ones they are looking for. So with time running out, he reaches out to Destiny to remind her that he is on her side, and it is up to her now to fix everything, for only she can understand. So right before the pit close behind him, lets it be known that he is a crumb between the teeth of a god, for he is nothing. So with Sinister now locked down, and the world seemingly saved, everyone seemed kind of concerned about how convincing he was at the last minute, but regardless of all that, everyone still has one question in mind, and that was what happens in the future that brought her to their timeline to save the day. In which Rasputin replies by saying, she isn't their savior, but rather a soldier, but if you want me to introduce you to the savior, that would be the mother. And on the very next page, we see the mother walking down the stairs. And while she traveled down, she oddly fills them in on most of everything that happened, without telling them about her involvement, of course. Even went as far as telling them about his Moira clone and how he used them, which was further corroborated by Destiny saying that she was working on stopping him from achieving just that. And then the mother went on to say how Sinister took over the world and then lost the Moiras and spent the next 1,000 years looking for them, as his clones waged war against each other throughout the universe. So with all this information hitting them lightning fast, Charles states that they will need some time to think over all this information. But unfortunately, this wasn't all the bad news she came to deliver, for she still had more to say, because she went on to say that since Sinister killed Hope, he managed to get some clever gene meddling done within the mutants that were brought back, and by doing that he managed to copy a part of his genes within them. So at the end of the day, he will be able to take them over whenever he feels like it without them even knowing. So with that bombshell out there, the mother exits the room as the council figures out what to do next. So as they talk about what went down, they came to the conclusion that no one that may have had their genes compromised cannot sit on the council, which means the 4 psychics have to be removed. Now, in Charles's opinion, that isn't nearly sufficient enough, for he recognizes the power the 4 of them have. So with the mother and Rasputin re-entering the room, we see 4 members of the Quiet Council self-exile themselves to the pit until they are sure their genes are clear of all of Sinister's insinuations. So as the council watches Krakoa rip its veins around the 4, Storm lets the mother know that she has performed a great service to Krakoa, and if there is anything they can do to repay her. And just like that, Charles, Emma, Hope, and Exodus were swallowed whole by the island. So with that said, issue number 1 of the Sins of Sinister Dominion, which was part 11 of the Sins of Sinister event, comes to an end. Now with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.